The Jack the Ripper murders. This is a double first. We are the first, this is the first conference to be organised by the Whitechapel Society, and it's the first conference to be organised and set in the very heartland, the very epicentre of the East End murders of 1888. Just across the road, you have Emma Smith, murdered or fatally injured on April the 3rd. Just round the corner, Martha Tabram, August the 7th. Up the road, Hanbury Street and Annie Chapman on September the 8th. And about 5 minutes walk over the way, if that, Mary Kelly, the last known London victim.
And this shows an ad for the play Jack the Ripper that appeared in January 1889 in a Brooklyn newspaper. You can see that there are lots of other entertainments being put on in Brooklyn at the time, including curiosities such as an ossified man and a Jabberwocky. The man who owned Holmes Theatre and Museum, as it was called, was an alumni of P.T. Barnum's circus, and as such he was used to exhibiting curiosities as well as putting on stage shows.
Quite by accident, I was working on a little project with a friend who was filming a water pageant in Wimbledon, whereby they have characters from Wimbledon's history who arrive in a boat and then they have a little bit about them. And this rowing boat arrived and there was this guy in a top hat and a cloak dripping blood, and they said, "And here's Jack the Ripper." And I thought, oh yeah. Now I'd lived in the area all my life, but I didn't realise it. So I went straight home and Googled it, as you do. And of course, as you all know, if you hit anything to do with Jack the Ripper, you get 19 million pages come up on the screen. So with a couple of colleagues, we spent about the next 9 months researching this, and we found that in fact he had lived only 3 minutes from our clubhouse in Westfield House in Wimbledon. So we discovered that Frederick Aberley, who was one of the lead policemen, retired to Bournemouth, which is just down the road from us. So we thought, well, there's a link here. So we developed the story over about an 18-month period and put together what facts we know. Now, I'm sure that a lot of people here tonight look at it and say, well, that's not quite accurate, that's wrong, or something else. But what we've done, to the best of our ability, is to put together the story. The other thing is, we can't compete with the likes of Michael Caine type films. We had a budget of 1,500 quid, so we thought we'll try to concentrate on the man and the characters.
The water lapping on the shores of the Thames, wherever that would happen to be, always has to lap oozily. It can't just lap, it has to be oozy. The fog is always dead gloomy, even though there was no fog. I have to say, the murders, of course, started as we are now, with quite balmy weather. I don't know what the weather was like, I presume it was reasonable when they started. Why would he be going around in a deerstalker and a heavy coat? It doesn't make any real sense. Why, if indeed is likely he killed these women from behind, would he need to wear a mask the whole time? It's part of the myth. We had the idea of isolation, we had the idea of the labyrinth. The labyrinth, I think, is quite important. East End is the labyrinth, it's where the Minotaur lives. And more than that, even, we have a sort of nostalgia for history. This is contained history. One of the things I think makes the East End interesting to people like myself and other people is that it's contained history. It's a space. It's a certain logical space. And I think that's interesting in itself. Let's go on to another picture.
Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love was used for many years as a theme to Top of the Pops. I'm sure most of us know the one I'm talking about. That one, yes. After leaving Cambridge, John worked as an arranger for Donovan, and his credits include Jennifer Juniper and Sunshine Superman. He's also worked with other artists, including Jose Carreras and Hot Chocolate, but not working at the same time, you understand. He's also the composer to the soundtrack to Kes and many other films. Another notable credit is that he's the original orchestrator of the worldwide success of Les Miserables, for which he won a Drama Desk and National Broadway Awards. And we're delighted to have him here today. And I believe, John, David, see, this is the first time we've actually met up in a decade.
Decade and a half.
15 years.
About that, yeah.
Oh, Christ.
Madness.
Only seems like a decade to me.
So, John, how did your association with this production come about?
As David mentioned, we'd worked on Silver Dream Racer and on Marlowe Private Eye, which were really very enjoyable productions, because David, unlike a lot of directors, gets the composer in beforehand, and you talk about the mood of the whole piece, you start to write stuff. On Marlowe Private Eye, we recorded a whole load of kind of 40s jazz things that he would use to create the mood on the set. So when he asked me to do Jack the Ripper, it seemed absolute wonderful opportunity.
Did you do any research into the Ripper to actually get any feel for your composition for this one? It's not a trick question.
No, I did. The most research I did was finding things to play in bar rooms and the found music, if you like, to make damn sure that it wasn't late to Mary Lloyd, it was early, it was of the period, it was the sort of thing that was played in bar rooms and music halls at the time, because sometimes with a piece, there's a kind of karma about it, that if you know that what you've got in there is genuine, you don't worry about it. If you start trying to cheat it, then you know somebody's going to find you out. So that's probably the most that I did in terms of research.
The actual score itself, from beginning to end, every little piece of incidental music, what was the time period of composition for it, from when you started to when the thing was actually finished and
well,
ready to be laid on the soundtrack?
I started to just do some initial stuff, and probably I think I wrote the front title before David started shooting, and in fact it was there to be able to cut before we went into the studio. We knew we wanted a sort of music that gave the kind of English feeling of infallibility at the end of the 19th century, total self-confidence in the rightness of Englishness. So we came up with a piece that was something between Arthur Sullivan and Stanford and early Elgar, but with a nasty little twist at the end. Then I sort of went off and did other things while David was shooting. Then once he got into post-production, David's one of the few people that also, when he's putting it together for distributors, the big bosses over in America, a lot of people put what they call temp tracks on it, which they just find a piece of music that will fit it just to keep the mood going. Because a lot of stuff that you shoot doesn't really feel right until you've got all the sound effects, the music, etc. But the danger with this is that the big bosses over at CBS fall in love with the temp track. So when you come to record the real music, they don't quite see it the way you see it. So I used to create temp tracks for David, which were very simple, low drones, atmospheric pieces. And in fact, one night I was putting together one of these pieces in my studio, out in the garden, dead of night, and I was adding reverb to it as the moment was about to approach, that the murder was going to happen. And what I didn't realise is, caught in the wheels of my rolly chair was the cable to my microphone, which was up here. And as I moved forward to push up the reverb, the microphone leaned over, and in the dead of night, about 10:30 at night, something tapped me on the shoulder. But this was actually only revenge for an earlier time, where the other thing that we tried to do with the score was have this big orchestral feel that then turned into versions of the theme in different harmonisations, different orchestrations, became more and more menacing. It was one of the first projects where I only used two themes, essentially. One was the love theme and one was the main theme. But that main theme just kept getting more and more menacing as things went on. And we added to it, I've always been a fan of music concrete, back from, you know, when I was a kid. And at the time, we found a technology, or technology was invented, called sampling, where you could record something or sample something onto a synthesizer, and then play it back on a keyboard. And by changing the pitch of it, or changing the equalization, you could mold it. So I recorded, for instance, my self-breathing into the mic. I put it onto the synthesizer, I dropped it an octave, and suddenly that cavernous sound that you get when we see Netley coming on the horse and carriage is actually me down the octave going, ah, ah. It produces, you know, an amazing sound. Put it with a synthesizer drone, and suddenly you have a new piece. Another thing that I created was I got my daughter to scream into the mic, put that back onto the keyboard and made it in different pitches, laid it up on a multi-track, put against it, crashing a crowbar against a metal door, and with one finger you could press on the thing and get this terrifying scream, which we used every time one of the things happened. The only trouble is, once again, I was working on it about 10:30 at night. Didn't happen to me. My friend came in and said, "Isn't it time we went out for a beer?" Did that to my keyboard, and he was the one who nearly had a heart attack.
When he comes up. Come on, work for me, thank you. There we are. This is Edouard Léon Scott de Matonville. He is French. He was a bookseller and printer living in Paris. And he built the phonautograph, which is this machine here. And it was patented on the 25th of March 1857. It wasn't to play any sound back in the way that Edison would later do, but to record pictures of sound waves. He didn't become rich on it. The apparatus was only bought by several scientific institutions. But in 2008, one of the sound wave pictures that was made by the phonautograph was discovered and converted into sound via already developed complicated computer programs. Others have been traced since then. I'm going to go through half a dozen of them. These are not hi-fi recordings. First is the earliest ever known sound recording from 1857, which is only a couple of seconds long and is completely incomprehensible. Great, isn't it? Amazing. Okay, it does get better. You understand these things are really primitive to begin with, and they do improve. Apparently that's meant to be his speech, and I think he was a fan of Barry White.
Probably sample a song out of that at the moment.
This is the famous piece. This is the earliest ever recording of an identifiable human voice. This was the first piece that was found in 2008. It was originally thought to be a girl singing it, but after doing a little more research on some of the ones that were found later on, they discovered it was actually Scott's voice himself, and they've been playing it twice the speed it should have been. But he's no great singer, but here we are, from 1860. Some of you may have heard this. For sale on iTunes right now.
He do. Thank you very much indeed, Mother. No, Charles Sloane was absolutely terrific at this, making up topical jokes and stuff. But unfortunately, he also fancied himself as a straight singer. And even more unfortunately, he had the most diabolical voice. But he pushed on with it, and he wrote himself a very serious ballad called The Maid of Judah. And this was nothing more than a collection of all the sins and the terrible things that have been heaped upon the head of the Jewish nation since the beginning of time. So you can imagine it was a fairly long song. Eventually he said to his friends, I'm going to try the song out tonight in the pub. They all begged him not to, but no, he went ahead, and there he was in the pub, and he started to sing this song. Everyone pulled their seats forward, expecting a few laughs, but no, he just droned on in this diabolical voice, and a pleasant quiet, until eventually he got to the line, no more shall the children of Judah sing. And a voice from the back shouted out, well, if they can't sing better than that, it's a bloody good job. Now, hopefully the chairman slung him out. Because
it's not signed.
eh?
Don't tell him!
Details, I don't know.
Another one with the flash.
With the oh,
Yes.
Flash him. Thank you.
Paul Begg, Keith Skinner and Martin Fido with his head on the block, and with myself wielding the axe. I must say that the A to Z I found very, very useful in compiling this lecture, as I did with Keith and Stuart Evans at the ultimate Jack the Ripper. If one has a suspect, then clearly one needs a description of sorts. The problem with witness statements is that they frequently don't give enough information. And some of the witness statements that we have in this case have had to be supplemented by newspaper reports. I shall try and deal with the 5 canonical murders: Nichols, Chapman, Stride, Eddowes and Kelly. The murder of Polly Nichols in Bucks Row on the 31st of August is straightforward enough. There are no witnesses to any sort of suspect. Nichols was drunk and staggering a bit as she made her way down the Whitechapel Road after 2:30 a.m. in the morning. Her body was found in Bucks Row. No body parts had been removed, but widely reported in the press was that one of Nichols' fingers bore the impression of a ring. Whether it was taken by the murderer, we can't be sure. We don't know if she was wearing it. However, we do know that the next victim, Annie Chapman, was wearing 2 rings which had been forcibly removed from her finger.
Fingerprints, hair samples, blood stains, paint fragments, bullets, DNA, you name it, they're all matched in microseconds. In real forensic laboratories, individual tests and sample matching is carried out by highly trained scientists in procedures that can take hours or even weeks to complete. You may be tempted to ask if any of this matters. Well, I think it does. I know we're just talking about entertainment, but I think it matters to this extent, that members of the public who may be asked to sit on a trial jury may acquire a distorted view of science and its use in the pursuit of crime. In the USA, this has become known as the CSI effect, and there are concerns that preconceived ideas about forensic matters affect the judgment of witnesses and jurors. In reality, clinching evidence in a crime investigation is often a matter of balancing probabilities rather than dealing with certainties. There is no better example of this than the case of Amanda Knox, which is currently being processed through the Italian courts, 4 years on from the original crime.
Jackie?
Get rid of me old videos now.
Okay, next one, yellow, 47. 47, yellow. 47, yellow, no, okay. Next one is also yellow, 33. 33, yellow. Loretta?
Quite a while to do them. So it announced that the following week would be another grand double number, that's their words. In other words, an assassination special. And now, in those days, certainly the IPN would send artists to the scene if they could. Clearly, it's Russia, they can't send the artists to the scene, so there's not very much background detail. As a result, what we've got is this focusing in, it's almost like a camera zoom lens, right to the point of that explosion, right to the critical climactic moment of the event. And so it does have this sort of camera-like effect. And notice that figure. He's the Russian policeman. They had spikes on their helmets then, and the police were always at the centre of everything that went on, even if they were Russian. Now, this it's been mentioned a few times, Phoenix Park Murders of 1882, and I think this is one of the best covers they ever did, really, because it's got everything you could possibly want. First of all, you've got the victims, you've got the victims' houses. At the bottom there, scenes from the incident. You even have, for the information of the public, a map. And then finally, you've got allegorical figures, very important. United in grief, that says. And here we have justice, the figure of justice. And there we have our murderers. And you notice they've got pointed teeth and pointed ears. They've been very demonized. And that was another thing that often happened.
Over a long period of time. They were initially very reluctant to get involved with yet another Jack the Ripper book, because there has actually been a downturn in the true crime market in recent years. Basically, publishers saturated the market. And yet another book on Jack the Ripper, well, you know, is it going to sell? But Frog eventually convinced them with the format he put forward, which was basically a number of chapters, each dealing with a separate suspect. And we had great fun as a committee deciding on 10 different suspects, 10 suspects who we thought had either received a lot of attention or were quite credible suspects. And we eventually, the 10 we eventually produced was Aaron Kosminski, Montague John.
He goes to New College in Oxford and he gains a BA in classics. It was a third class. This was in 1880. Now, in fact, if you go through his later career, and I will go through his later career, the classics are important because he seemed to indulge himself in a lot of Latin, especially particularly when he was summing up in a court case. I'll give an example of that later on. This is an example of Druitt's handwriting. This has actually been given to me by Lindsay. She researched it. Now I think, I don't know whether these have been published before. Somebody said that they might be published in a book by Stuart Evans. Certainly the text has been published. I think that was published in Ripperologist. But what it does show is, obviously it shows Montague John Druitt's signature and also his handwriting. And I think it's rather interesting that you know, we look at the handwriting of a suspect, preferably not Mr. Maybrick. And you can see, obviously, the educated hand there. And these were found by Lindsay at the West Sussex Records Office.
And Also, those who are not dashing off will be looking forward to having a pint somewhere, I've no doubt. Firstly, your questionnaires on how satisfied you are with the conference and what has not been, what you don't like and what you think has gone well. Please, do fill them in and return them to Sue, please, because we do need them. They are extremely important to us in deciding what should be done in the future. Now, the only other announcement I'm going to make is to thank the committee of the Whitechapel Society, Sue, Frog, Steve Foster, Mark Galloway, Patrina Thompson, Adrian Morris, for all their absolutely brilliant efforts in putting the conference together. I mean, this was, I think, a special effort, absolutely brilliant. And I also like to pay tribute also to our facilities manager, Steve Rattay, and to young Phil down there, who's been an absolutely brilliant MC. And I think I'd like all those people to put their hands together